Hello everybody. Right, it's been a fair few days since the last recording I did regarding my resin work. Now, one of the things I've been doing was this. Trying not to show it fully. Now, the last thing I showed was that I'm sure I showed it. That I'd put way too much resin on here and it had not finished nicely, and I was gonna have to sand it back. Now I have sanded it back. I have also applied a new clear coating of resin, but what I will say is I massively underestimated how much work sanding resin would be. Now, it's not that sanding it down is hard work, it's not. It's easy as fuck. It's the polishing it back up that is the problem. On my test piece of wood, okay, so I've not really done a lot on this recently, but on these particular arrows, I had sanded it before and tried to polish it up a bit. It didn't really quite work. So what I tried to do with it was apply some clear resin and see if that automatically made it clearer. And to be fair, it has worked quite well. But there is so much excess on there that I would have to sand that down. And then I'd still be in the situation of it'd be quite cloudy, so a bit like this bit of the blue here, that bit's cloudy. The rest of it is where resin has been reapplied to it, but not very nicely. So basically sanding the resin makes it cloudy. Now the problem with that is that it looks shit. And the only way to really get it back is to effectively polish it up. But it's not as easy as just going, well, let's polish it. It's not like that. I mean, for example, what I ended up doing with this, because this, I basically had a clear coat all the way over the top of this, but not applied very nicely. So what I ended up having to do was sand this back all the way down to as level as I could get it, which meant going through that clear coat of resin, or as much as it is possible, to try and get a nice smooth finish. But, and I mean, okay, that doesn't look cloudy on the resin at all, but what happened was, as I was sanding it down, it did go cloudy. Now, when sanding it down, just to put it into perspective, just trying to show you here, there was another sheet as well. Okay, so on my orbital sander at the moment is a sheet of 240 grit, a 240 grit sanding sheet, which is pretty fine, to be honest. So I used that initially to sand it down. And then I progressively went to, well, actually I tried going with a very fine sanding sheet first. So 3000 grit, very smooth, but what happened was it basically picked up so much shit that it was then rubbing and scratching that shit over the rest of the work. So through trial and error and learning, what I ended up doing was, okay, if I get rid of that. Yeah, what I ended up doing was going, right, we'll go with a 240 grit and we'll sand it. And then we went to a P800, an 800 grit, and as you can see, there's quite a bit on there, so that took quite a lot off. Then I cleaned it. And then I went with another 800 grit, a clean one, so that I wasn't going to be using the dirt. And obviously that got quite dirty as well. So then I cleaned the wood and I went to a 1000 grit, which still picked up quite a bit of shit, but less than the last lot. and was making it obviously a lot smoother, and then I carried on and cleaned it, and then went to 1500 grit, which had a lot less shit on it. So now we're getting to the point where, okay, we're not taking loads off, and that's the idea. We shouldn't be at this point. It should be just tiniest amounts. Now, I did try hand sanding them with these sanding pads with a bit of water. Didn't work. Didn't really work for me. Now, I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where they've been using these kind of sanding pads with a bit of water and an orbital sander. So I may have to try that at some point, but I don't know if there were specifically waterproof ones of these or not. So anyway, I then eventually went to a 2000 grit sandpaper, and obviously a lot less on that as well, but still picked up quite a bit, and eventually ended up with a P3000 grit, so 3000 grit sandpaper. So I've basically gone through the whole range, because what I'd done previously, as I mentioned, was I went straight to the 3000 grit and it didn't quite work. And basically it wasn't coarse enough to smooth the resin enough. Basically you have to go, as I've learned now over doing some research last few days, is that basically you need to start with a coarser grit for the initial bit of sanding of it, and then, I mean, when the rest of the sanding, it's not really to take off layers as such, it's to actually polish it up. But then you go through with a finer and a finer and a finer. If you just make the jump from 240 to 3000, it ain't gonna work, as I've learnt. But to be honest, even with the 3000, I still ended up with it being a little bit cloudy. Now, I now believe that that was because I was sanding them dry. So what I actually did was I got my wet dry sanding pads, my old ones, cleaned them up a bit. I need to check actually what grit this is. I'm pretty sure it's, well, it's nowhere near 3000. Fucking hell, made me jump. It's nowhere near 3000, but it is very smooth. But because I was able to wet sand with this, what I found was that it was taking the cloudiness off of the resin. So the wet sand, there's nobody in there, honest. Well, no, yeah, there's nobody in there, it's just the wind. If it opens now, I'm going to shit myself. Yeah, so using the wet sand did clear up the cloudiness. Now, not to 100% perfectness, because I was getting achy and tired, I was hurting, and it was a massive task, like I say, to do all of the sanding. Now, what I ended up then doing on the test piece of wood was putting that clear coat of resin over the cloudy resin to see what it would do. And it turned out it actually does make it quite clear, because basically the resin is filling in all of the imperfections on the cloudy bit, and it makes it clear, because it's cloudy because light is reflecting off in different directions, so you can't see through it. So I did a lot of the wet dry sanding, as much as I could, and then I got to the point where I was like, right, okay, I'm going to put I mean, to be fair, with the sanding, I went as far as, with some of these letters, the black resin, or even with the clear resin on the first coat, there were still indentations in the letters. So with the sanding, I actually was sanding the wood back to try and get the wood level to the lettering, rather than bringing the resin up, so to speak. So there was a lot that I was doing. But I have since applied another coat of the resin, which I will admit was difficult to do because I didn't have any foam brushes, but I did have sponges. But for some reason the resin wasn't spreading very easily with the sponges that I was using, and it's probably because they were too soft. whereas the foam brushes are much firmer, so they were able to spread it. Now what I've ended up with is a much better finish at the moment than I previously had before I started sanding it back, but a not perfect finish. I'll move the camera around. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, and might be able to get the light, if we look at the dot for the eye, you can see it's not a very smooth finish. And as I get the light, you can see how bad a finish it actually is on there, right? So initially, like that, it looks fine, it looks good, but then when the light gets on it, right, you can see actually it's not a very good finish, okay? So that's the stage I'm up to now. So with that, I was effectively today, I kind of was just going to apply some outdoor varnish on it. A gloss exterior varnish, it's clear, it's waterproof, and this stuff is from outside, so this shit should be perfect. But I figured I might as well continue my learning process a bit here, right? In that, well, hopefully with this particular piece, I'm hoping that I shouldn't need to do anywhere near the amount of sanding that I've already had to do on the other pieces as I would need to on this, because I do not intend on putting anywhere near as much clear fucking resin over the top as I did on these other pieces, right? Because in hindsight, I fucked up there. I should have either not done it or created a proper border around this, and then properly put a full layer of proper full coating on it that would like go to its own level. And because I didn't do that, I tried to take shortcuts. It's cost me in the long run. I would have been much better off creating a border around it, or just putting a much lighter coating on it. Now with this particular piece and the other one that goes with this, I've sanded this down, not super fine, but I've basically stripped the wood. I've sanded it down. I've then also, when I applied the clear coat on this, I also did a clear coat on this as well, mainly for the lettering, like I did on the other ones, to seal the wood, so that when I put the black resin in, it's not going to fucking leak everywhere. But this does have a bit of a crack that goes from here all the way over to about here. So there is a chance that I'm going to end up with black resin in a lot of that crack. Now unfortunately, with me not having any foam brushes, there's not a lot I can really do about that, but I am going to try and apply black resin into this lettering, but my aim is to have none of the resin spill over of a letter. So a bit like when I first did these, I was topping it up and topping it up and topping it up until like I was getting it as level as I possibly could. I think with the smaller ones, what I'm going to do is try and get as much black resin in there as I can without it overflowing the letter, and then I will use a clear resin, and nowhere near as much as I did on these other ones, a very small amount of clear resin just to top it without it overflowing. Basically the aim would be to have enough resin in the lettering to just about fill them, and if need be I can just add a little bit extra when I need to, and then as I've done with these ones, apply a very thin layer of resin with a sponge over the top. Now what I'm going to do with these, as I said, I could just varnish them and say fuck it, they're done, but I'm not happy with that. I'm going to use it to learn a bit more with. So I've got a couple of ways I can look at trying to do this. Right? Excuse me. One of them would be to take my wet dry sander and wet the piece of work and just sand it and see how it comes up, right? Because it worked previously at getting rid of cloudiness. Cloudiness isn't the problem now, it's just a sort of stubbly finish. The other thing I can try and do is applying a little bit of water with my sanding sheets, the fine sanding sheets, all the way up to about 3,000, well, all the way up to 3,000, and seeing how I get on with that, because this is now at a point where, yes, it's got a sort of layer of resin on it, but it's flat. It's just not, contradictory, it's flat, but it's not smooth. Yeah, it's flat, but it's not finished. And it definitely needs a bit of really not sanding back, but it's the same like with the varnish that I applied to other pieces of wood. Before the last coat of varnish, you sand it back. Not a lot, just enough. And so I'm thinking that that's what I should do with these. So I'm not going to do that today though, because what I want to do, because the time consuming part is waiting for the resin to dry. I mean, for example, I happened to pick this up today, and it's been about 3 or 4 days since I splurged an extra bit of resin in the middle there, and it's gold, not that you can tell the colour, and I happened to touch the resin that I put in there 3-4 days ago, and considering that it's meant to be dry in 24 hours, it's not. It's still gloopy, and I've no idea why. Now, the resin that I put into the lettering, that has gone hard, so I don't know whether it's because of the colour that was mixed into that spare bit of resin, or what. I really don't know, but yeah, it is not dried yet. So it's an odd one, that. So yeah, one of the most time consuming parts is letting the resin dry. So what I'm going to do is put this and the other one like it to one side, right? I'm going to get this one filled with resin along with its teammate, and then let them dry. And once these are basically up to the same point as the first ones, then I will look then at doing that final sand back before applying the outdoor varnish. And the outdoor varnish I will apply, I am intending on putting all over this because the whole thing is going to be outside. Right, so what I'm going to go and do now is I am going to upload these video clips onto my computer, and then I am going to attempt to record me filling in these letters on this particular piece of wood. The only thing is it could take a lot longer than is available in my memory on my phone, so if the recording dies on it, then unfortunately tough shit, because I can't afford to stop this to go and free up some memory. Right, I'll be back in a bit. Okay, now I have just finished doing the other one of these pieces, so I'm going to make a start on this one, but there's a good chance I'm going to need to mix up some more resin in a little while, but I'm just going to try and I'm going to do as much as I can. Now I'm going to try and be gentle with this, not always easy, and the lettering is not particularly deep on this particular piece of wood. Now I've already been working with this little batch of resin for probably what, 20-30 minutes, so it's going to start getting a little bit dry or less fluid, so it could be a little tricky. Now I'm obviously very self-taught with this kind of stuff, so there's a couple of techniques that I'm doing at the moment, just to try and help me. So for example, I've put a bit of the resin in there, but I'm actually going to take a cocktail stick just to move the resin about a bit, and I'm doing this even with a brand new batch, but it's just to help the flow of the resin. But also I was noticing when I did the other pieces the other day that some of the very sort of curly edges of letters, the resin wasn't quite getting there, but if I did this, it would. The flow was there. Now this isn't looking very good, to be honest. I've done much better applications, but at least it shows me the way that I've learned to pick up the resin if I've put too much down. Very handy way of doing it, to be fair. I wish I'd thought of this the other day. Now, with filling the letter in, obviously I'm only interested in filling the letter in with the black resin. I'm not wanting to cover the whole board, which is why I'm using the syringe to try and just fill the lettering. Now this is very difficult with some of these letters because of how shallow it actually is, but that's where the cocktail stick is going to come in very handy. Obviously the plan here is to not need to sand loads of this off afterwards, so as long as I can start getting it spread in the right areas, I can then suck it up. Because I can always put more in. It's easier to put more in than it is to keep taking loads off. Now, to be fair, I could probably do with getting some much finer syringes. It would help. Unfortunately, I can't afford to do that at the minute, so I'm kind of stuck with what I've got. Now, I know that when I was working on the other pieces the other day, when I was in this situation where I had too much resin going down, I tried mopping it up with tissues, sponges, and it just fucking made things worse. Which is why I said I wish I'd thought of this a few days ago. Because it does work. I mean, really, it's fucking obvious that it works. Obviously the intention is to not put anywhere near as much resin down to end up being in this position, but sometimes it can't be helped. Now I'm squirting it back into my tub of resin. If I'd only got a little bit to do, then I would have just continued putting it into the next letters along, but I want to just spend a little bit of time just spreading this bit of resin about so that it can fill all the relevant gaps, and then I can try and pick up the rest of the excess. I mean, I have noticed that when it's small amounts of resin, it seems to be much more difficult to get it to flow. It seems to take longer to get it to sort of fill up all the crevices. It's getting a bit awkward to try and pick more of that up. Sorry, I've got my hand in the way. So one of the other techniques that I was using my mixing sticks just to move the resin away from the wood bits rather than trying to get a tissue in there. And also with the sticks, if I notice that it isn't sort of flowing correctly, I can move a bit more resin with the sticks. I have to be careful with that. I'm going to give it a moment just to sort itself out a little bit as we move on to the next letter. Now, because it is such a sort of delicate carving or very shallow, it is very difficult. I mean, the bigger lettering was easier to do because it was a much deeper cut. I mean, one way to do this would be to just literally fucking smother the whole fucking thing, but as we've learned, that's too much. As we've learned, it takes fucking ages to do that. I made a bit of a fuck up there on the A. Do without air getting into the syringe, but sometimes that can't be helped either. As I mentioned, because I've been working with this particular batch for a good 20 minutes or so, it is going to start getting more difficult to get it to flow comfortably, or easily, should I say. I have applied a tiny little bit too much on one half of the A and on the R. I'll have to do a bit more spreading of that in a minute. Because this is quite a big opening on the syringe, it is a bit tricky to do. I'm going to have to try and get a bit of tissue in a moment, clean off some of the bits of excess here, because the syringe is a bit too wide to really start picking a lot of that up. It was struggling a little bit. I suppose one way I could do it, try doing it. Would be like so. It's not perfect, but it's not too bad. You know, definitely got a little bit too much resin in that R still. Okay, see if we can get a bit out of the R and put it in the E. We'll give that a few moments. We'll move on to the next letter. Not that you can see because my hands are in the way. Now you can see why I said that doing this is quite time consuming, because it's not just about getting it in place, it's about fucking tidying up the mess when you fuck it up like that. I really do need a narrower syringe, or a syringe tip anyway. And one of the things I'm trying to do is kind of let sort of gravity and a bit of pressure work on its own, dropping a couple of little bubbles out from the syringe rather than really pumping pressure onto it. That could be a bit much. Let's see if we can get that spread around a little bit. Hopefully these are going to level out quite nicely in the end. Like I said, from what I've done so far, I think it's because I'm using such small amounts that it's not got the weight of itself to really sort of push into different areas, whereas when I've done a couple of tests on bigger pieces, the weight of the resin itself helps push into the relevant areas. Because technically I should be able to pull the resin out of there, and the rest of the resin in that letter should fill what I've just taken out. But it might do, it just might take some time. Or it might need a bit of help. To be honest, I'm making a bit of a mess of that there. I'm not overly happy with it. But what can I do other than try and learn and get better at it, which is what a big part of this is all about. I mean, this is obviously very fiddly sort of resin work. Probably not something that people would recommend to learn with. Oh shit. But since when have I done anything in the normal way? Let's see if I can get a bit more out of there. Just to pop it in there. You have to be a little bit careful here because it's close to having enough in. If I go and splodge too much in at one bit, it'll fuck it up. Which poured out of the syringe then. That was quite interesting. And one of the things when I was working on the bigger letters, one of the things that I was doing was I was sucking up much more resin into the syringe, but I do feel it made things harder. I was splodging a lot more, like I was getting it coming out smooth, and then all of a sudden it just go and just fucking squirt a massive fucking dollop of resin exactly where I wouldn't want it. So on this occasion I've gone for an attempt at a slightly more delicate approach, which has worked because I've not had a massive dollop. I've just still been applying a little bit too much to some of the letters, but that's just simply down to the size of the syringe. So I'm kind of not kicking myself too much about that at the moment. And one of the reasons why I'm not going too much on attempting to clean up any excess at the moment is that I'm wanting to give it a bit of time to really start sinking in and soaking in, because there's no point me wiping it off if it is going to soak in and end up where it needs to be. But obviously there's occasions where, yeah, I've applied way too much. Oh, excuse me. Also, I need to be a little careful around these letters I'm doing now, because that's where there's a crack running straight through the wood. Tricky letter, this one, the G. It's almost like a tiny O, a tiny S, and it's not very deep. Now, if my memory on my phone does run out any moment, yeah, there's not going to be anything I can really do about it, unfortunately, because this is obviously, it is time sensitive. I mean, even though it doesn't take a long time to transfer the data, any time is time that I don't really need to be spending away from this. Be careful of doing that. Now, ideally, the way I wanted this to work was for me to be able to squirt some resin in, it put in a nice fucking layer of it, and then I can just top it up. But if it's not spreading into all of the corners like I need it to, then it's, yeah, it is a bit more time consuming. And like I said, I could just fucking go for a mega coating and then just fucking sand it back, but I really don't want to go down that route. Not at the moment anyway. Not when I can try and learn a few things along the way like this. I'm starting to get a bit low on the resin. Hoping I've got enough. I mean, I've made a smaller batch than I have been doing recently because I've been having quite a lot left over. Even though I've been using it to try a few different things, I don't want to be wasting any really. So in this situation I've opted for, if I need to make more, I'll make more. Oh, that's a big dollop. Interestingly, put a bit more in the syringe and the size of the dollop's coming out a bit bigger, so gravity definitely having an effect. Or should I say the weight of the resin? It's having an effect. Because there is a difference between gravity and weight. so looking at this, there's still a few that I may need to take a bit of the resin out of. It's no surprise really. It's not loads I'm taking off there, but it doesn't need to be. Got a bit much on that eye, which was interesting because it initially didn't look like there was enough on there. Let's take a bit off the H. Okay, I really am starting to get low on what I've got available. There's one of the downsides as well of having the bigger end to the syringe is that it can quite easily suck up air instead of the resin. Like it has done there. I'm kind of rushing this a little bit in terms of just trying to get as much down as I can. I mean, it must be, yeah, so it's probably been about 45-50 minutes now since I made this batch of resin, which is why, even though it is still quite fluid, it's not flowing lots. I mean, it's flowing a bit, but not lots. may be able to suck up a bit of the resin from a few of the other letters just to help me get it spread out a little bit. I'm going to be annoyed if I'm one letter fucking short, which is where I'm at the moment. Now, it's not a bad thing necessarily that I'm a little bit short, because it is meaning that I'm having to take a bit off some of the other letters, which should help me in the long run. Okay, A. Right, let's see how I get on just spreading these around a little bit. If it turns out that I need to make a little bit more, I'm not going to be too annoyed at that. I'd rather not have to, but it can be done. It may have to be done, looking at how how little amount of resin I've got in these letters here. Let's see what we've got. There's not a lot left in the old mixing tub, but there's a bit. Well, when I said there was a bit, yeah, it was a bit. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to need, well, I think I'm going to need to, oh bollocks, make up another, not batch, but just make up a little bit more. Unfortunately, I am a tiny bit short. Give that a little bit of a spread in, try and give it a chance to at least fill everywhere that it can. It's not far off. It really isn't far off full. And maybe I just need to give it a little bit of time to spread before I do make up a little bit more. I'm going to try and do it to see if I can pick up any excess. Well, that's not fucking worked. Trying to pick up excess and made it fucking worse. She's off. She works around the B, but not the W. Maybe it's just because it's so close. So let's take a bit out of there. I think what I might have to do is, once I've let this dry, I may then have a look at I was going to say then have a look at topping it up, but to be honest, I know it needs topping up, so I might as well just fucking do it now, thinking about it. Right, I don't need a lot. Oh, excuse me, I should have a much cleaner mixing tub than that, to be fair. Or measuring tub, should I say. Where did I just spill that? Sure, I just spilled that onto here. If I did, I can't see where. Right. Yeah, I was going to say it's not easy to get small amounts of these poured out, and it's not. But anyway, right, I'm pretty sure my phone is about to run out of memory, so when it does, see you. But also, hopefully I will have finished this. Now, for just out of interest, if you want to know, same parts resin as hardener. Mixed together gives you your resin. Gives you your epoxy resin. So I'm now going to need to mix this up. I'm going to use a clean stick to mix it up, because I do only need a tiny little bit of the black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour a little bit into me mixing tub I've been using, add the colour to that, and then I can use the rest of this on something else as a bit of a test. But also in a minute I'll be able to check on the other piece that I've already done to see whether that needs topping up as well. Right. Okay, so I've got a bit in there, drop some colour in. Oh! Ow, 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 ow. Oh, cramp. Oh, shit. Oh, that hurt. Oh. That come out of nowhere. Oh. Holy shit. Well, I wasn't expecting that to be on the end of the video. Oh, that literally just come straight out of nowhere, just fucking crippled me. Oh, that hurt. Right, let's drop a little bit more colour in it. Because I've not got a lot in there, it's quite thin. Right, now I am going to need to be careful with this bit because this is going to be considerably runnier than the rest of what I've been doing. And it's not loads that I need. Alright, let's see if there's anywhere that I've taken a bit more out than I was really wanting to. This needs a little bit more. think we might be okay at that. So get me cocktail stick and just make sure I'm spreading it about a bit. They might need a little bit more in the G. Okay. Right. I think then I'm just about done on that. So what we can do now is just spend a few minutes trying to clean up any excess, of which I'm certain I will fuck this up.